Years passed, and the little puppy who once trembled in the corner of a shelter cage grew into a strong, graceful dog whose very presence radiated calm and strength. Hope's fur had filled in thick and glossy, her once frail body now sturdy and full of life. Strangers who met her on walks still recognized her sometimes, pointing softly, whispering, "That's the dog who saved that boy." But to Michael, she was simply family. Their days together had become a rhythm of peace. Long walks at dawn, lazy afternoons stretched on the porch, quiet nights curled beside the fire. The world had not forgotten her story, but within their home, she was not a hero or a headline. She was his hope, his companion, his heart. Michael often thought back to the very first moment he had seen her in the shelter, so broken, so hopeless, and it was hard to reconcile that fragile creature with a confident soul at his side now. Sometimes he would pull out the old photo he had taken on that first day, the sad little puppy with dull eyes, and hold it up beside her as she lay at his feet, strong and serene. The difference always brought tears to his eyes. "Look at you," he would whisper, his voice thick. "You've become everything they thought you never could." Hope continued to touch lives long after the frenzy of the news faded. Children from the neighborhood would run up to greet her, hugging her neck without fear, their parents watching with soft smiles. Families who had adopted pets because of her story often returned to visit, bringing their once-overlooked dogs along, proud to show how love had transformed them too. The shelter that once nearly gave up on her had grown busier than ever, filled with people seeking out the very animals they might have ignored before. And every time Michael heard the staff say, "This is because of Hope," his chest swelled with quiet pride. But perhaps the greatest change was in Michael himself. Before Hope, he had lived a quiet, somewhat lonely life. He had gone to work, come home, and let the days pass by in a blur of routine. Saving her had filled his world with color again. She had forced him to slow down, to notice the small victories, to find joy in the simplest things, a wag of a tail, a curious sniff at a falling leaf, a head resting trustingly against his hand. In saving her, he had rediscovered what it meant to truly live. On one golden evening, when the sun dipped low and the sky glowed with the colors of fire and honey, Michael sat on the porch swing with Hope pressed against his side. She was older now, her muzzle streaked with gray, her pace a little slower, but her eyes still held that light, that quiet courage that had once shocked the world. Michael stroked her fur, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, and whispered, "You gave me more than I could ever give you. You turned sadness into joy, fear into bravery, loneliness into love." Hope lifted her head, resting it gently on his lap, and in her gaze was a depth of understanding that words could never capture. As twilight settled around them, Michael realized something profound. People had always said he had saved the saddest puppy that day in the shelter. But the truth was far more powerful. She had saved him just as much, maybe even more. She had taught him, and countless others, that no life was too broken to be healed, that the smallest act of kindness could ripple into something far greater than anyone imagined. And so they sat together, man and dog, survivor and savior, bound forever by the simple miracle of second chances. News of the incredible moment spread faster than Michael could have imagined. Someone from the crowd had posted a video online, the small boy darting into the road, the blur of a car, and then Hope's sudden leap as she knocked him out of harm's way. The clip was shared thousands of times in just hours. By the next morning, headlines began to appear. "Shelter dog saves child's life. The saddest puppy turns hero." Michael's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, neighbors, and even strangers thanking him for saving Hope and praising her courage. But what touched him most were the comments from people who admitted they had always overlooked dogs like her, the shy, frail ones, the ones too scared to wag their tails behind the shelter bars. Now they were saying, "I'm going to the shelter today. I want to give one a chance, too." The shelter where Michael had first found Hope was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Calls poured in, people lining up to adopt animals that had been waiting for months. The staff couldn't believe it. "She's changed everything," one of the workers said to Michael over the phone. her voice filled with awe. Hope is giving all of them hope. Michael felt a surge of pride, but also humility. He remembered the doubtful glances the staff had exchanged that first day, certain she would make it. Now, because of her, countless lives were about to be saved. Journalists began arriving at Michael's home, asking for interviews, wanting to meet the dog whose courage had inspired the world. At first, he hesitated. Hope still startled easily at crowds and loud voices. But something remarkable happened. Instead of retreating, she began to face the cameras with quiet composure, standing beside Michael as though she understood the importance of her story. The same dull eyes that had once avoided all contact now gazed directly into the lens, calm and steady, as if to say, "I made it. Others can too." The footage aired on local and national news, and soon donations poured into shelters across the country. But beyond the fame and attention, it was the quiet encounters that struck Michael the deepest. Parents brought their children to meet Hope, some of them tearfully hugging her while telling their kids that she was proof kindness mattered. Other dog owners confessed they had once thought about surrendering their own struggling pets, but after hearing about Hope, they changed their minds. One elderly man knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he stroked her head, whispering, "You've reminded me that it's never too late for a second chance." Hope leaned into him gently, her warmth a silent comfort. Michael watched all of this unfold with a mix of amazement and gratitude. He had never expected that the frail little puppy he carried out of a shelter would become a symbol for so many people. Yet even as she became a public hero, to him she was still simply Hope, the dog who had once flinched at his touch, who now slept curled against him each night. He often thought about how different things might have been if he had walked past that last cage, if he had chosen one of the happy, wagging dogs instead. The thought sent shivers down his spine. Everything, the boy's life, the wave of adoptions, the inspiration spreading across communities, had come from that one simple choice to stop for the saddest puppy in the room. That evening, after another long day of visitors and calls, Michael sat on the porch with Hope at his feet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and purple. She rested her head on his knee, her body relaxed, her eyes reflecting the light with quiet strength. He scratched behind her ears, speaking softly into the fading light. "You've done more than I ever dreamed, girl. You've changed the world." Hope wagged her tail, slow and steady, and in that moment Michael knew that no amount of headlines or praise mattered compared to this. The bond they shared, the life they had built together out of brokenness and love. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that gave no warning it would be remembered forever. The sky was a pale blue, the air crisp with the last hints of winter clinging to it. Michael had taken Hope for her walk through the neighborhood, their usual route past quiet houses and the small park where children often played. Hope trotted beside him, her steps steadier than ever, her ears flicking with alertness at the sounds around her. She was still cautious, still careful, but she no longer shrank from the world as she once had. Instead, she studied it, as though every day she was discovering something worth noticing. Michael smiled, proud of how far she had come, never imagining that in moments she would do something that would shock everyone, including him. They were approaching the corner when a sudden shriek pierced the calm. Michael's head snapped up in time to see a ball bouncing into the road, followed by a small boy racing after it without looking. His mother screamed from the sidewalk, her voice tight with terror, but the boy didn't stop. At the same instant, a car turned the corner, moving too quickly, the driver unaware of the child in its path. Time seemed to slow. Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat, his body too far away to reach the boy in time. And then, without hesitation, Hope moved. She darted forward with a speed and force Michael hadn't seen in her fragile frame before. Her paws pounded the pavement as she lunged toward the boy. With a swift, powerful push of her body, she knocked him sideways, tumbling him to the curb just as the car screeched past, brakes screaming, tires burning against asphalt. The vehicle stopped only inches from where the boy had been. Dust and silence filled the air. Michael stood rooted in shock, his heart hammering as his mind processed what had just happened. The boy's mother rushed forward, scooping her son into her arms, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Hope, who stood trembling but unhurt, her chest heaving with exertion. The little boy clung to his mother, pointing at the dog with wide eyes. "She saved me," he whispered. Hope, once the puppy too afraid to lift her head, stood tall now, her gaze steady, as if she understood what she had done. Michael could hardly believe it himself. He knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her neck, his voice thick with emotion. "You brave girl," he whispered. "You saved his life." Neighbors had seen the whole thing. Doors opened, people came rushing out, voices buzzing with astonishment. "Did you see that? The dog saved the boy. Unbelievable." Some took pictures, others recorded videos, unable to believe their eyes. Hope, overwhelmed by the attention, pressed closer to Michael, but she didn't cower. She didn't hide. She stood there, her head held a little higher than before, as though some hidden courage had finally broken free. The boy's mother approached Michael, still shaking as she tried to find the words. She bent down and stroked Hope's head gently, her tears falling onto the dog's fur. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling. "She's a hero. She saved my son." Michael's throat tightened. He looked at Hope, remembering the fragile creature he had carried out of the shelter, and felt tears burn his own eyes. "She saved more than him," he murmured quietly. "She saved herself too." Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Michael replayed the scene in his mind. He had thought he was rescuing a broken, hopeless dog, but today had proved something deeper, that even the most wounded souls carried strength waiting to be revealed. Hope lay curled beside him on the couch, her body warm and peaceful, her breathing steady. He stroked her fur, his voice soft in the quiet. "You're not the saddest puppy anymore, Hope. You're the bravest." She shifted slightly, pressing closer to him, and for the first time, Michael felt not only like her savior, but also like the one who had been saved. By the time the second month rolled around, Hope was no longer the silent shadow hiding under the bed. She still carried her scars, physical and invisible, but Michael could see pieces of her true self breaking through the layers of fear. Every morning she greeted him now, not with barking or leaps like other dogs, but with a quiet stretch, a soft blink of her eyes, and a cautious wag of her tail. To Michael, it was better than any noisy display of affection, because it meant trust, hard-earned and precious. He had learned to measure progress in small victories, and each one felt like a gift. Their daily walks became her favorite ritual. At first, she would cower at every car that passed, pressing against Michael's leg for safety. But gradually, she lifted her head, sniffing the breeze, noticing birds flitting from tree to tree, tilting her head at the laughter of children in nearby yards. One afternoon, a neighbor walking his Labrador stopped to chat. Hope froze, trembling, but when the Labrador sniffed at her, she didn't retreat completely. She stood there, her little body stiff, but her nose twitched curiously. The neighbor smiled and said, "She's come a long way, hasn't she?" Michael only nodded, pride welling up in his chest. People in the neighborhood had started to notice her transformation, and some even asked about her story. Each time Michael explained where she'd come from, their expressions softened with amazement. At home, Hope began to explore corners of the house she had previously avoided. The kitchen became her new favorite spot because she quickly discovered that food preparation often ended with small treats accidentally slipping to the floor. Michael would catch her watching him intently, her ears perked, her body trembling not with fear but with anticipation. Sometimes he laughed out loud, shaking his head at how far she had come. One evening, he placed a squeaky toy in front of her again, the same toy she had ignored weeks before. This time, she nudged it, then clamped it gently in her mouth. The squeak startled her, and she dropped it immediately, staring as if it had betrayed her. But Michael clapped his hands softly, cheering, and after a pause, Hope tried again. The sound filled the room, and for the first time, she barked, short, sharp, but full of life. Michael froze, then grinned wide. "That's it, girl. That's your voice." The change wasn't only visible to him. Online, people began following her journey. Michael had posted a simple picture of her on her first day home, frail, sad-eyed, curled into herself. Weeks later, he shared another. Hope curled beside him on the couch, her eyes brighter, her ears perked, her body resting comfortably. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in. "She looks like a new dog. This is incredible. Thank you for giving her a chance." Strangers from around the world began cheering for her, asking for updates, sending messages about how her story gave them hope too. Michael hadn't expected it, but he realized her name was becoming her truth. And yet, it was in the quiet, private moments that her growth touched him the most. Like the night she climbed onto his bed for the first time without hesitation. He woke in the middle of the night to find her curled against his chest, breathing softly, her body warm and relaxed. For a creature that had once flinched at the slightest touch, this trust felt like a sacred bond. He lay awake for a while, one hand resting gently on her back, and whispered, "I've got you, Hope. Always." It was around this time that Michael noticed something new in her eyes. Not just trust, not just relief, but a spark of confidence. A readiness to engage with the world. She no longer walked with her head permanently lowered. She lifted it now, scanning her surroundings with curiosity. There was a softness, a quiet strength building inside her. Michael didn't know then how much that strength would matter, how it would soon surprise not just him, but everyone who would witness what she was capable of. For now, he only knew that the saddest puppy he had ever seen was learning to live, and her transformation felt like watching winter thaw into spring. The ride home was silent except for the hum of the car engine. Hope sat curled up on the blanket Michael had laid on the passenger seat, her tiny body trembling despite the heater blowing warm air. Every few minutes, Michael glanced over at her, his heart twisting at the way she kept her head low, refusing to meet his eyes. He spoke softly, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. No more cages. No more cold nights." But his words seemed to fall into a void. She remained motionless, her dull gaze fixed on nothing. When they finally pulled into his driveway, Michael scooped her into his arms. She resisted at first, stiff and uncertain, but he carried her gently inside, whispering reassurances. His home was modest but warm, the fireplace crackling with a soft glow. Michael had prepared a small bed in the corner of the living room, a fluffy blanket, a toy rabbit, and 2 bowls, one filled with food and the other with fresh water. He set Hope down carefully near the bed, giving her space to explore if she wanted. But she didn't move. She stayed frozen in place, her thin legs trembling. Michael knelt beside her and placed a piece of food in front of her nose, coaxing her to eat. For a long time she ignored it, then finally, timidly, she licked it once before turning away. He sighed quietly, realizing this was going to be harder than he thought. That night, Michael decided to sleep in the living room. He lay on the couch with the lights dimmed low, keeping an eye on the fragile puppy who had curled herself into the farthest corner of her bed. She didn't whimper, didn't cry, didn't move, just lay still, as though afraid the world might notice her if she breathed too loudly. Around midnight, Michael stirred awake to the faint sound of nails tapping against the floor. He opened his eyes just in time to see Hope creeping cautiously toward him, her little body hunched, as though expecting punishment. She stopped a few feet from the couch, watching him intently. Michael didn't move, didn't speak, just opened one hand and let it dangle over the edge of the couch. After a tense pause, she inched closer, sniffed his fingers, then retreated quickly back to her bed. It was the smallest gesture, but to Michael it felt monumental. Over the next week, their days fell into a quiet rhythm. Michael cooked simple meals for himself and spent hours sitting on the floor near Hope, not crowding her, just letting her know he was there. Sometimes he read aloud to her, his voice steady and calm, filling the silence with something other than fear. Other times he simply lay on the rug, close enough that she could approach if she chose. Slowly, very slowly, she began to change. One morning, as Michael placed her bowl of food down, she surprised him by eating 3 full bites before retreating. The next day, she ate 5. The day after that, She licked the bowl clean for the first time. Each victory was small, but Michael celebrated them quietly, smiling to himself as if she had accomplished something extraordinary. The first time she ventured onto the couch beside him was a night he would never forget. He had drifted off watching television when he felt a faint weight press against his leg. Opening his eyes, he found Hope curled beside him, her little head resting against his thigh. His breath caught as he reached down slowly, afraid of startling her, and stroked her thin fur. To his amazement, she didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed softly, the sound of trust beginning to bloom. Tears stung his eyes as he whispered, "That's it, Hope. You're safe now. You can rest." Day by day, her eyes began to lift more often, no longer always fixed to the floor. She started following him from room to room, her steps cautious but purposeful, as if she was learning that being near him meant comfort instead of danger. Once, when he dropped a ball near her, she stared at it for a long time before nudging it gently with her nose. The ball rolled back to him, and though she didn't chase it again, he saw the flicker of something new in her gaze, curiosity, perhaps even joy. For the first time since she'd come home, her tail moved, a tiny wag, barely there, but enough to send a rush of warmth through Michael's chest. He sat back, smiling through tears, knowing that this was only the beginning of her healing. Michael hadn't planned to visit the shelter that day. He was only passing by, the winter sky heavy with clouds, when he caught sight of the faded sign and felt an unexplainable pull to go inside. The building was small, worn down, and carried a chill that seeped into his bones the moment he pushed the door open. Inside, the sound hit him first, barking, whining, the desperate cries of dozens of animals pleading for attention, for a chance, for love. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one holding a set of hopeful eyes that followed him as he walked past. Some dogs jumped, wagging their tails furiously, begging to be noticed. Others pressed themselves against the bars, pawing at him with a mix of desperation and affection. Michael smiled sadly at them all, but something made him keep walking deeper into the rows, as though something was waiting for him. And then he saw her. In the very last cage, almost hidden in shadow, a tiny puppy sat curled tightly into herself. She didn't bark. She didn't wag her tail. She didn't even lift her head when his footsteps approached. Her fur was thin and patchy, her frame so frail he could see her ribs rise and fall with each shallow breath. What struck him most were her eyes, not wide and eager like the others, but dull, heavy with a sorrow that seemed far too deep for such a young creature. The sight stopped him in his tracks. His chest tightened with a painful ache, and he found himself crouching down, trying to meet her gaze. "Hey there," he whispered softly, as though speaking too loudly might shatter her completely. For a long moment she didn't move, and then, barely, her eyes flickered toward him, filled with a sadness so profound it almost felt human. A shelter worker approached and sighed. "That one's a tough case," she said quietly. She was found tied to a post in the rain, starving and freezing. "We don't know how long she'd been out there. She doesn't eat much, doesn't play, barely responds at all. Most people don't even stop to look at her. They want happy dogs, healthy dogs. Not this." The worker's tone was gentle but tinged with resignation, as though she had already accepted the little puppy's fate. Michael didn't reply right away. His heart ached at the thought of this fragile life being overlooked, discarded twice, first by whoever abandoned her, and now by the world that didn't see her worth. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving her there another day. Standing, he straightened his shoulders and looked at the worker with quiet determination. "I'll take her," he said simply. The woman blinked in surprise. "Are you sure? She's going to need a lot of care." "She may never." Michael cut her off with a small shake of his head. "I'm sure. She deserves a chance." He turned back to the cage, his voice softening again. "We'll call you Hope," he murmured, "because that's what you need, and what I think you'll give back." As the adoption papers were filled out and the cage door finally opened, Hope trembled violently, resisting at first as though afraid to trust even freedom. Michael knelt down and held out his hands, not forcing her, just waiting patiently. After a long, trembling pause, the little puppy inched forward and let herself be lifted into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body fragile like porcelain, but the warmth of her pressed against his chest filled him with a strange, fierce protectiveness. Around them, the other dogs barked and howled, but in that moment Michael heard nothing but the tiny sound of Hope's breathing. The shelter staff exchanged doubtful glances, whispering among themselves that she probably wouldn't make it long. But Michael didn't care. He cradled her gently, promising silently that he would do everything in his power to prove them wrong. As he carried her out into the cold winter air, he glanced down at her and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." For the first time, her ears twitched ever so slightly, as if some part of her understood.